Welcome to Grounded, the home of mindfulness, meditation, self-exploration, which leads to self-transformation. Now today's video is all about how negative emotion is the very foundation for our personal sense of selves. Now this idea, this identity that we all hold, this personal sense of self, this personal identity, is actually built upon fear. Now fear has many sort of categories within it itself, and our identity is built upon these subcategories to fear, like shame, like loneliness, rejection. These kind of all make up fear itself, and it's this foundation that our personal sense of self is built upon. And today I'm going to be talking about how that happens. Take a breath. So, first of all, we have to understand that the most damaging thing we can do and what we get exposed to is our negative emotion from our parents, because it's the negative emotions shown by our parents that create the whole foundation to this personal identity. Now, whenever a parent is expressing negative emotion towards a child, when a parent is expressing a negative emotion, it creates a negative response. It creates the same emotion within the child. Now, as the same emotion, as that negative emotion arises within the child, they get put into a state of fight, flight or freeze, which is the survival response becoming active in a child. And when that survival response comes active in a child, the child doesn't have the ability to see that what they are witnessing is an unhealed aspect in the parent. And instead, the child takes on the idea that they are the cause of mum and dad's unhappiness. So let me give you a little scenario. Child's running about, playing, being loud. Mum says, calm down, listen to me. Stop running around, stop being mental, stop doing crazy stuff. Child doesn't listen. Mum says again, listen to me. Child continues to play. It's a scenario that everybody's familiar with, especially if you have children. This then begins to create a response. This then becomes a trigger for the parent, and an emotion arises within the parent because the parent is now being triggered by the child. The parent's emotion, negative, comes up, takes them over, and then they enforce control over the child. Now, when we look at negative emotion, we're looking at false. Negative emotion is always false. The survival is always false. And so, as that emotion becomes active in the child, in the parent, they then overpower the child, which creates the same reaction in the child. Now, what negative emotion is, it's a repelling. It's not a coming together. Love is a coming together. Love is an attraction, is a union, but negative emotion is a repel. So what actually happens is, because mum's now being triggered, because she hasn't dealt with this trigger, she has to cancel it. She believes the child to be the trigger. So she tries to cancel out the trigger through the child by overpowering the child, creating an emotional reaction in the child. Now, the child doesn't have the ability to see that what's actually happening is mum has been triggered on an emotional unhealed aspect of herself. And instead, mum has tried to cancel out the trigger, in this case the child. But what the child doesn't see is that this is an unhealed aspect in mum. And what the child actually does is the child believes itself to be the cause of mum's trigger, to be the cause of mum's unhappiness. And as the child believes that they are the root to mum's unhappiness, they then begin to interpret that emotion. So a child might begin to interpret that emotion, something like, my mum doesn't care about me. My mum doesn't love me. Because what they're feeling is they're feeling the repel through the negative emotion. They're feeling the repel from the parent. They're feeling the gap. They're feeling the distance. Love is a coming together. Love is a union. When we bring negative emotion, it pushes apart. So the child feels the distance between the child and the parent. And then the child has the negative emotion that's been created by the parent. And then the child adds meaning to the emotion. And this is what begins to build the sense of self. Our sense of self is always to keep us safe. Look at what most of your thoughts are about. Look at what most of your life is about. It's about how people react to you. It's about keeping yourself safe. Personal sense of self is how you are seen by another, how you interact with another, how you are judged by another. And that personal sense of self, you could look at it and call it in a nutshell the very basis of your first relationship with your parent. And then in our adult life, we're still living in this conditioning, living in what we created from our childhood, from the ability of not truly seeing what's happening. And then we live through that pain. We become that pain. We become rejection. And because it hurts to see this, because it hurts to realize this, when we have children and they trigger us on this painful front, the pain comes up and we do it to them. And it becomes a generational thing. And this is how human suffering is passed on. It's passed on generation after generation after generation by parents believing themselves to be unworthy, unloved, which was created in their childhood through negative emotion with the parents. So how do we get rid of human suffering? Well, we become aware of how human suffering came to be. And then we stop showing it to our children. We stop expressing it. So showing emotion to your children, negative emotion to your children, is one of the most devastating things that you can do. Because the negative emotion will always imprint over any positive, because we're talking about body, we're talking about survival. And a negative imprint is more important than a positive one when we're talking about survival. And as always, these videos are always to help create more self-awareness. So if you are being triggered by your child, it's not your child, it's that your child is triggering a part of you that needs to be healed. And if that part was healed, there would be no emotion. There would only be what was needed for the situation. Till the next one, much love.